चलो सर, लाइव हो गए आप।
ये मुझे मोबाइल से चेक करता हूँ।
Namo Ramana. A very warm welcome to all the devotees for Raman Kendra Delhi's Sunday Satsang with Mr. Michael James. Narayananji is at the shrine. I shall now request him to initiate with puja. Sir.
So start. Om Achyutaya Namaha, Om Anandaya Namaha, Om Govindaya Namaha. Brahmaram Vishnu Sativanam Vinapujam Prasannavanam Jaya Sarvajinoga Upasante Ayam Mutta Samusardo Vinondo Bandhano Prendo Ayam Mutta Samusardo Tadeva Ragnam Tadinam Tadeva Taravanam Chandravanam Tadeva Vidyavanam Devavanam Tadeva Lakshmi Padete Tendri Purami Om Om Shiva Om Maha Om Janam Om Tava Om Satyam Om Tattvadanam Bhagavadevatya Dhimi Diyo Yona Prajodeya Mama Jyotishamsam Gurusara Namo Pata Samasta Durga Tatvarasam Parmeshwar Chitam Krishman Sakamana Nirvayan Prasadastamada Vignesam Pujam Tasye Tritya Meri Tulsi Tulam Gandhavarma Devada Tritya Durga Logadesam Vishna Durga Sansatariman Devi Vitram Durgatanam Agamatam Devanam Kamnatam Purakratam Kandaram Karam Yadav Devdavaranam Amopata Samasta Durga Shakaraka Parmeshwar Chitam Nirvanda Siddhatamado Vignesam Pujam Tasye Ganananda Ganapati Kumavame Kavinda Vinam Vasatamam Deskarajam Brahmanam Brahmanaspadam Purnam Asmidarsha Vinde Mahaganapati Jayami Mahaganapati Avamayami. Om Mahaganapati Masam Samarpayami Om Mahaganapati Majjam Samarpayami Om Mahaganapati Padjam Samarpayami Om Mahaganapati Masam Samarpayami Om Mahaganapati Mogadayakam Samarpayami Om Mahaganapati Masananandam Samarpayami Om Mahaganapati Vastadatmakshadam Samarpayami Om Mahaganapati Yajnovidatam Akshadam Samarpayami Om Mahaganapati Gandharayami Samarpayami Om Mahaganapati Gandharayam Samarpayami Om Mahaganapati Mananasamastagam Samarpayami Om Mahaganapati Mantrakumam Samarpayami Om Mahaganapati Pushpai Pujayami Om Sumudaya Namaha Om Ekadandaya Namaha Om Kapilaya Namaha Om Gajagarnagaya Namaha Om Lambodharaya Namaha Om Vigadaya Namaha Om Vigdharajaya Namaha Om Vinayagaya Namaha Om Dhumagedave Namaha Om Ganatakshaya Namaha Om Balachadraya Namaha Om Gajananaya Namaha Om Vakramundaya Namaha Om Surpakarnaya Namaha Om Erambaya Namaha Om Skandapurjavaya Namaha Om Siddhavinayagare Namaha Om Shankara Moksha Vinayagare Namaha Om Atupura Vinayagare Namaha Om Mahaganapatiye Namaha Nana Vida Parmala Patra Pushpani Samarpayami Dupartham Samarpayami समर्पयामि अक्षतां समर्पयामि ओम भूर्भुवस्सुः तत्सवितुर्वरेण्यं भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो यो न प्रचोदयात् देवसवितुर्वरेण्यं सत्यं प्रसन्नामि अमृतस्त्वं स्वाहा ओम प्राणाय स्वाहा अपानाय स्वाहा ओम ध्यानाय स्वाहा उदानाय स्वाहा ओम समानाय स्वाहा ब्रह्मणे स्वाहा महागणपतये नमः महागणपतये नमः महागणपतये नमः नाट्यचक्रनैवेद्यं समर्पयामि मध्ये मध्ये पानीयं समर्पयामि अमृतोपसं सूत्रावसं समर्पयामि कर्पूरं समर्पयामि कर्पूरं समर्पयामि नीराजनं समर्पयामि नीराजनन्तरम् आस्मनीयं समर्पयामि महागणपतये नमः महागणपतये नमः महागणपतये नमः वक्रतुण्ड महाकाय कोटिसमप्रभ सर्वगुणं गुरु मे देव सर्वकार्येषु सर्वदा गणपति प्रसादं सरसा प्रणमामि ओम ओम स्व ओम ओम धनम ओम तम ओम सत्यम ओम तत्सुतरपवन्यम भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो यो न प्रचोदयात् ओम वदितुं गुरुसुरो मोपात समस्त दुर्ग कैत्वारा ಈ परमेश्वर नित्यतम सुबह सोमने मूर्ते आद्य ब्रह्मण द्वितीय परार्थे श्रीवेदे वराकल्पे वैवस्वत मन्वन्तरे अष्टाविंशतितमे कलियुगे प्रथमे पादे जम्बूद्वीपे भारतवर्षे भरतखण्डे मेरु दक्षिणे पार्श्वे सगाप्ते अस्मिन् वर्तमाने व्यावाविर्कये शोभकृतनाम संवत्सरे प्रवादिनां षष्ट्या संवत्सरे शोभकृतनाम संवत्सरे दक्षिणायने वर्ष ऋतु सिंहमासे कृष्णपक्षे एकादशी तिथियां शुभतिथौ भानुवासरयुक्तायां पुनर्वस नक्षत्रयुक्तायां शुभ नक्षत्र शुभ योग शुभ कर्ण एवं गुण विशेषण विशिष्टायां अस्यां चतुर्थ्यां शुभतिथौ जन्मप्रदेशपर्यन्तं मध्ये सम्पादनं सर्वेषां भावानां सत्यापननार्थं अकुर्मानं प्रेमसद्धर्य वीर्य विजय आयुरारोग्य ऐश्वर्यनाम अभिवृद्ध्यर्थं समस्तमङ्गलाभिवृद्ध्यर्थं समस्त दुर्गोपशान्त्यर्थं रमण महर्षि प्रसादेन ज्ञानवैराग्य सिद्ध्यर्थं श्री रमण महर्षि पूजां करिष्ये तदङ्गं कलश पूजां स करिष्ये विघ्नेश्वरं यथास्थानं प्रतिष्ठापयामि सोमनाथे क्षेमाय पुनरागमनाय च सरसस्य मुखे विष्णुकण्ठे रुद्रसमाधिस्थ मूले तत्र सिद्धो ब्रह्मा मातुपुने सर्वदा कुशक्तु सागरा सर्वे सप्तसुरा ऋग्वेदो यजुर्वेदो सामवेदोपधारण गंगे सतमेन गोदावरी सरस्वती नर्मदे सिंध कावेरी जलेस्मिन् सन्निधं गुरु अंगे सहिता सर्वे कर्तां समाधिस्था आयातु देव पूजार्थं दुर्दशकारगा अंबुरा साम्राज्ञो विष्णु विष्णु करे देवस पूजित प्राजन मुस्तुते देवो देवालय प्रप्त देव देवस्थान अंजार निर्मालयं स्वयं भवने पूजयेत् ओम संक्रमणात्मक शक्तियुक्ता योग पीडात्मने नमः आधार शक्तिये नमः मूल प्रकृतिये नमः आदिवराय नमः आदिपूर्णाय नमः अनंताय नमः पृथ्व्यै नमः आदित्यादि नवग्रह देवताभ्यो नमः दश दिग्पालेभ्यो नमः गुरु ब्रह्मा गुरु विष्णु गुरुदेव महेश्वरा गुरु साक्षात् परब्रह्म तस्मै श्री गुरवे नमः ओम अस्य श्री प्राणदुष्टामस्य ब्रह्मा विष्णु महेश्वरा ऋषिरेखे सामधर्वाणी संधांसी सकल जगत सिद्धि सम्मार्गाणी प्राणशक्ति परादेवता आम बीजम हरिं शक्ति ओम कीरकम प्राणदुष्टाप्ने विनियोग आम दुष्टाभ्यां नमः हरिदर्दिनीभ्यां नमः ओम मध्यमाभ्यां नमः आम अनादिभ्यां नमः हरिगणिकाभ्यां नमः ओम कर्णदुष्टाभ्यां नमः आम दिव्याय नमः हरिं शक्ति स्वाहा ओम शिवाय वषट् आम तौसायम हरिं नेत्रदाय वषट् ओम अस्त्रदाय पट् पूर्वस्वरूप दिग्बंध ध्यानम रक्तांबोधिस्त बोधोदित तरुणस्वरकराक्षे वासं कोदंडम इक्षुत्व मणिगुण पंचमानात् विप्राणस्य कपालंतरे दापिनोसोरटिया देवी वाला गौरना बहुसुखि प्राणस्वरान ओम हरिं क्रोम क्रोम हरिं माम अम्यम रंगम वंशम सम्मह अंश सोहम सोहम अंश अस्यामूर्तो जीवतिष्ठतु अस्यामूर्तो सर्वेन्द्रियाणि वाङ् मनस्सस्तोत्र दिव्या प्राणवाक् पाणिपाद आयुपुष्टानि या कस्ति स्वस्ति सुखं सुरं दृष्टन्तु स्वाहा अस्य श्री प्राणप्रष्टामन्तस्य ब्रह्मा विष्णु महेश्वरा ऋषिरेखे सामधर्वाणी संधांसी सकल जगत सिद्धि सम्मार्गाणी प्राणशक्ति परादेवता आम बीजम हरिं शक्ति ओम कीलकम प्राणप्रष्टाप्ने विनियोग आम अंगुष्टाभ्यां नमः हरिदर्दिनीभ्यां नमः ओम मध्यमाभ्यां नमः आम अनादिभ्यां नमः हरिगणिकाभ्यां नमः ओम कर्णदुष्टाभ्यां नमः आम दिव्याय नमः हरिं शक्ति स्वाहा ओम शिवाय वषट् आम कौसायम हरिं नेत्रदाय वषट् ओम अस्त्रदाय पट् पूर्वस्वरूप दिग्बंध असुमेधे पुनर्स्माक सक्ष प्राणवीन उदय भोगम योग पश्येम सूर्य मुंदे मलयान सत्ति आवायुदो भव सद्दाविदो भव सन्निधो भव सन्निधो भव अवगुणितो भव सुप्रसन्नो भव कुमुदो भव वरदो भव प्रसिद्ध प्रसिद्ध स्वामी सर्वजगन्नाथ यावत् पूजावसानकं तावत् ध्रुवं प्रतिभावेन दिव्येस्मिन् सन्निधं गुरु ओम भूर्भुवस्वः सुवर्ण्यं भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो यो न प्रचोदयात् देवदूतप्रचोदयात् पतञ्जामि ओम स्वाहा ओम प्राणाय स्वाहा अपानाय स्वाहा ज्ञानाय स्वाहा उदानाय स्वाहा समानाय स्वाहा ब्रह्मणे स्वाहा ओम नमो भगवते श्री अरुणाचल रमणाय नमः नमो भगवते श्री अरुणाचल श्री रमणाय नमः नमो भगवते श्री अरुणाचल श्री रमणाय नमः अध्याय राजा विष्णु पार्वती नमः शिवाय नाट्यचक्रे विद्यं समर्पयामि नित्यं देवालयं समर्पयामि रुद्रावसं समर्पयामि नीराजनं समर्पयामि नीराजनं परमात्मने समर्पयामि Now I will recite Bhagavan's Ramana Stotra. All of you can follow. श्री गुरुभ्यो नमः गुरु ब्रह्मा गुरु विष्णु गुरुदेव महेश्वरा गुरु साक्षात् परब्रह्म तस्मै श्री गुरवे नमः अपार सत्य सुगुवारि राशौर्य शौर्यमात्रं पूर्णं समस्तं गुणायुधं तं ब्रह्मं कबीरं गीताविनिनं निर्दिशिदयामि ओम महासेन महंसेन जाताय नमः ओम श्री रमणाय नमः ओम गुरवे नमः ओम अखंड संविदाकराय नमः ओम भुजसे नमः ओम कारणोद्भवाय नमः ओम जगत पितावताराय नमः ओम श्री भूमिनाथास्तलोचिताय नमः ओम पराशर कुलोत्तंसाय नमः ओम सुंदरातलवत्पदाय नमः ओम कमनीय सुचारित्राय नमः ओम शयायंबाय श्रयायते नमः ओम शोणासुल मोहलीन मानसाय नमः ओम स्वर्णस्तकाय नमः ओम श्रीमद्वादशांत महात्रय भक्त विद्योदयाय नमः। ओम महाशक्ति निवादेन प्रबुद्धाय नमः। ओम परमार्थ विदे नमः। ओम दिव्यराय नमः। ओम पितृपदान्वेषिणे नमः। ओम इंदु मौलिनां पितृमदे नमः। ओम पितृदेष्ट सुमनसैनं प्राप्ताय नमः। ओम तपोमयाय नमः। ओम उदासीनाय नमः। ओम महायोगिने नमः। ओम महोत्साहाय नमः। ओम कुशाग्रतीये नमः। ओम शांत संकल्प संभ्रमाय नमः। ओम सुसुंदरसे नमः। ओम सवित्रे नमः। ओम स्थिराय नमः। ओम तपस्वीत सर्वंगाय नमः। ओम उल्लांबूज विलोचनाय नमः। ओम चंद्रकाशिदासी मंडितानि मंडलाय नमः। ओम सूदवाट्यां समासीनाय नमः। ओम सूर्यदाख्य विप्रमाय नमः। ओम वेद वेदांत तत्पत्नाय नमः। ओम चिन्मुत्रणे नमः। ओम त्रिगुणाधिकाय नमः। ओम विरूपाक्ष गुहावासाय नमः। ओम विराजत सलाकृतिये नमः। ओम उच्चित्तनयनाय नमः। ओम पूर्णाय नमः। ओम रसिदासन तांडवाय नमः। ओम गंभीराय नमः। ओम परमाचार्याय नमः। ओम सुब्रसन्याय नमः। ओम अभयप्रदाय नमः। ओम दक्षिणासी निभाय नमः। ओम धीराय नमः। ओम दक्षिणाभिमुखाय नमः। ओम स्वराजे नमः। ओम महर्षिये नमः। ओम भगवते नमः। ओम ईत्याय नमः। ओम भूमविद्या विशारदाय नमः। ओम विमलाय नमः। ओम दीर्घदर्शने नमः। ओम आप्ताय नमः। ओम ऋतुमार्ग प्रदर्शकाय नमः। ओम समत्रुसे नमः। ओम सत्यत्रुसे नमः। ओम सत्याय नमः। ओम प्रशांताय नमः। ओम अमित विक्रमाय नमः। ओम सुकुमाराय नमः। ओम सदानंदाय नमः। ओम मृदुवासिने नमः। ओम दयार्णवाय नमः। ओम श्री सोमनाथुल स्कंदाधर्मनिकेतनाय नमः। ओम सद्दर्शनोपदेष्टने नमः। ओम सद्भक्त वृद्ध प्रकृताय नमः। ओम गणेश मुनि प्रियेन सेवितां त्रिसरोरुवाय नमः। ओम गीतोपदेश सारादि ग्रंथ संचिन्न संशयाय नमः। ओम वर्णाश्रम मदातीताय नमः। ओम रसज्ञाय नमः। ओम सौम्याय नमः। ओम आत्मपदे नमः। ओम सर्वावनि मनस्तानां आराध्याय नमः। ओम सर्वसद्गुणे नमः। ओम आत्मारामाय नमः। ओम महाभागाय नमः। ओम मातृमुक्ति विदायकाय नमः। ओम विनदाय नमः। ओम विनुदाय नमः। ओम विप्राय नमः। ओम मुनीन्द्राय नमः। ओम भावगोज्वलाय नमः। ओम दर्शनादक सम्मारणे नमः। ओम मौनेन स्वप्न बोधकाय नमः। ओम निर्जाति कर्षानित्याय नमः। ओम स्प्रणाबंध मोचकाय नमः। ओम अंतस्मेन जटांशवे नमः। ओम संसारार्म तारकाय नमः। ओम सोनादिशुके दिष्टरे नमः। ओम आर्त विद्या प्रकाशकाय नमः। ओम अविच्युत निजप्रज्ञाय नमः। ओम नैसर्गिक महातपसे नमः। ओम कमंडलुराय नमः। ओम शुभ्रगोविरवसनाय नमः। ओम गुहाय नमः। ओम दंडपाणिये नमः। ओम कृपापूर्णाय नमः। ओम पवरोग पिशक्वराय नमः। ओम स्कंदाय नमः। ओम देवतमाय नमः। ओम अमर्तयाय नमः। ओम सेनानिये नमः। ओम पुरुषोत्तमाय नमः। ओम नमो भगवते श्री अरुणाचल श्री रमणाय नमः। नमो भगवते श्री अरुणाचल श्री रमणाय नमः। नमो भगवते श्री अरुणाचल श्री रमणाय नमः। कात्याय नमः। मुरुगाय नमः। पल्ली दैवानिये नमः। सुब्रमण्याय नमः। स्वामीनाथने नमः। दक्षिणामूर्तिये नमः। नटराजावने नमः। भैरवरे नमः। नंदिमैश्वराय नमः। शिवपार्वतीये नमः। ओम नमः शिवाय नमः। ओम नमः शिवाय नमः। ओम नमः शिवाय नमः। ओम शिवाय नमः। ओम शिवाय नमः। ओम शिवाय नमः। Let us all recite Buddhist Saram. Atturagya prapade palam karma kimbaram karma nagaram priti mahagato vadanakaram paramataram gadarirodagam Ishwarapidam snechayapidam मुक्तिसाधकम् कायवाङ्मन कार्यमुत्तमम् पूजनं जग चिन्तनं क्रमात् जगतैषधी युक्तसेवनम् अष्टमूर्तिभिः देवपूजनम् उत्तमस्तवा उज्जमं जग चित्तजं जग ज्ञानमुत्तमम् आद्यधारया शोधसाधनम् सरलचिन्तनम् विरलताभरम् वेदभावना सौम्यमित्यसौ भावनाभिधा भावनीमदा भावशून्यस भावसुस्तुति भावनाबला भक्तिरुद्धमा इष्टरे मन स्वस्थता क्रिया भक्तियोगबोधातनिष्ठितम् वायुरोदना प्रीयते मन जालभक्षिव रोधसाधनम् चित्तवायव चित्क्रियायुधा सागयोर्वयि शक्तिमूलगा लयविनाशने उभयरोधने लयकथं पुनर्भवति नो मृतम् प्राणबन्धना लीनमानसम् एकचिन्तना नाशमेत्यद नष्टमानसो पृष्ठयोगिन कृत्यहस्तिगुम् स्वस्तितं जग दृश्यवारिदं चित्तमात्मन चित्वदर्शनं तत्त्वदर्शनं मानसं दुहिं मार्गणे गृहे नैव मानसं मार्गार्धवा वृद्धयस्त्वहं वृद्धिमाश्रिता वृद्धयो मनो विद्यहं मन अहमयं कुतो भवति चिन्वद ऐपदत्यहं निजविचारणम् अहमिनाथवा अहमहं तया स्फुरधीरस्वयं परमपूर्णस इदमहं वदा अभिख्यमन्वहम् अहमिलीनके अप्यस्य सत्तया विक्रयेन्द्रिय प्राणतीतम नामसे कस तज्जडं सस तत्त्ववासिका चित्त्ववेधरा चद्दया इति चिद्दयायहम् ईशजीवयो वेशतीपिता सस्वभावतो वस्तु केवलम् एषानत स्वात्मदर्शनम् ईशदर्शनम् स्वात्मरूपत आत्मसंस्थिति स्वात्मदर्शनम् आत्मनिर्भया आत्मनिष्ठता ज्ञानवर्जिता अज्ञानहीनति ज्ञानहस्तिः ज्ञातुमन्तरम् चिन्स्वरूपमे आत्मदर्शने अव्यया भवा पूर्णसित्सुखम् बन्धमुक्त्यदिं कम्बरं सुखम् इन्ददीयते वस्तुदैविक अहमवेदनम् निजविमानम् महति तमो रमणवादियम् महति तमो रमणवादियम्
Namo Ramana. A very warm welcome to all the devotees for Ramana Kendra Delhi's Sunday Satsang with Mr. Michael James. This evening, Mr. James shall be speaking to us on Anma Vidai, as he has been doing for the last few months. Mr. James needs no introduction, but a very quick one, since I'm aware we might have a few new devotees joining us on YouTube today. Mr. James had started his spiritual journey at Tiruvannamalai during his visit to India in 1976. He stayed there for over 20 years and had a long friendship and association with Sri Sadhu Om and assisted him in translating Guru Vachaka Kovai, Nanyar, Ulladu, Narpadu, and other works of Bhagavan into English. He is now based in London, where he regularly discusses Bhagavan's teachings with fellow devotees. Mr. James addresses devotees of Ramana Kendra Delhi every second Sunday of the month. Sir, over to you.
Okay. Before I start, I just want to say, if anyone has any questions, if you're watching on Zoom, you can put your questions in the chat, or if you're watching on YouTube, there's a live chat. You can you can put your enter your questions, and then at a certain point during the meeting, I will ask if there are any questions, and there'll be any questions you may have asked will be relayed to me. So now I'll begin. Om Namo Bhagavate Sri Arunachala Ramanaya. Namaskaram. Last time I began discussing verse 3 of Anmavidya, and I'll continue that today. So just to pick up the thread from where we left off last time, I'll just read the meaning of verse 3 again. What Bhagavan says in verse 3 is, without knowing oneself, if one knows whatever else, what? That means so what? Well, how can, if we don't even know what we ourselves actually are, how can whatever knowledge we have about other things be reliable or of any real value? That's the implication of the first sentence. Without knowing oneself, if one knows whatever else, what? And the second sentence is, if one has known oneself, then what exists to know? The implication being, if we know ourselves, then there's nothing else for us to know. And then he goes on to say, when one knows in oneself, that self, which is the light that shines without separation in separate living sentient beings, within oneself, the shining of oneself will flash forth. This is the shining forth of grace, the annihilation of ego, the blossoming of happiness. So that is the meaning of the verse. Last time I was discussing the implication of the first sentence, without knowing oneself, if one knows whatever else, so what? So I will take up the thread from where I continued last time. Last time I had, among other things, I had discussed verse 4 of Uludunapadu, in which Bhagavan teaches us that whatever is known, in certain basic respects, in certain fundamental respects, must be of the same nature as what knows it. And so that was verse 4 of Uludunapadu. In this meeting, I'll begin from discussing verse 9 of Uludunapadu. I'll be discussing quite a few verses of Uludunapadu because they all have bearing on what Bhagavan is saying in this third verse of Anmavidya. So what Bhagavan implies in Uludunapadu verse 9 is that the triad of knower, knowing, and known depends upon the knower, namely ego, which will cease to exist as such when it knows what it actually is. So I'll just discuss this verse now. All our knowledge of anything other than ourselves entails two factors: the subject or knower, who is called pramata, namely ourself as ego, which is what is always aware of itself as I am this body, and the object or what is known, which is called prameya. However, there is also one other factor that is required for us to know anything other than ourselves, namely a means of knowing, pramana. A means of knowing, which is called means of knowing, is called pramana. Such as there are many means by which we know things, such as seeing, hearing, tasting, smelling, feeling, perceiving, experiencing, remembering, understanding, inferring, or believing any testimony that we suppose to be reliable. These are just some among the many means of knowing, or pramanas. Between these three factors, which are called triputi in Sanskrit or mupadi in Tamil, there is a chain of dependency, because without a means of knowing, there could not be anything known. And without a knower, there could not either be a means of knowing or anything known. So the first link in the chain is the knower, the second is the means of knowing, and the third is whatever is known. The latter being what the knower knows by any appropriate means of knowing. Of these three factors, therefore, the most fundamental is the knower, and it is, and on it the other two factors depend, as Bhagavan points out in verse 9 of Ulladu Napadu. He uses two terms here, irritegal and mupadigal. Irritegal means pairs or dyads. That is referring to pairs of opposites, like knowledge and ignorance, existence and non-existence, happiness and misery, right and wrong, existence and non-existence, life and death. All these are pairs of opposites. These are called irritegal. And the other term he uses is mupadigal, which is a Tamil form of the Sanskrit term triputi, which means these three factors: the knower, the means of knowing, and whatever is known. So what he says in this verse is, these, for simplicity, I'll translate the irritegal and mupadigal as dyads and triads. But dyads here specifically means pairs of opposites, and triads means these three factors of knower, knowing, and known. So what he says is, dyads and triads exist always holding one thing. If one sees within the mind what that one thing is, they will slip off. Only those who have seen the reality. They will not be confused, see. This is a very, Bhagavan has packed a lot into this, so we need to unpack it to understand exactly what he's saying. When he says dyads and triads exist always holding one thing, what is the one thing on which they all depend? They depend upon the ego, the knower. That is, without the knower, couldn't be anything known, or there couldn't be any means of knowing or anything known. Because you can't have a means of knowing without something that is knowing. You cannot have something that is known without something that knows it. And dyads, the pairs of opposites, are things that are known by us. So dyads and triads both exist only in the view of ourself as ego. So what they depend upon is ego, which is one of the three factors of the dyad. It's the most fundamental, but it's the knower, which is upon which the knowing and the known depend. So when he said dyads and triads hold one thing, the one thing they hold is ego. Hold it here means they depend upon it, not literally they hold it. It's actually ego that holds other things, but here he's using the term holding in the sense of depending. And then he goes on to say, if one sees within the mind what that one thing is, they will slip off. Why should this be the case? This is because, as he makes clear in so many verses of Ulladu Napadu and elsewhere, the nature of ego is such that we rise, stand, and flourish as ego by attending to things other than ourselves. But if we turn our attention back to see what we ourselves actually are, this ego will subside and dissolve back into its source. As he says in verse 25 of Ulunaptu, Tedinal otum pidicum. If thought, it takes flight. That is, we seem to be ego only so long as we're looking outside. If we turn our attention back within to see what we ourselves actually are, ego will disappear because there's no such thing as ego. We seem to be ego only so long as we're not looking at ourselves. If we look at ourselves, we don't find any such thing as ego. So since ego subsides when we investigate ourselves, or as he puts it here, if one sees within the mind what that one thing is, in other words, if we look within to see what this ego is, ego will subside, and dyads and triads which depend upon ego, they will therefore slip off. In other words, everything, according to Bhagavan, everything depends only upon ego, because all things other than ourselves seem to exist only in the view of ourselves as ego. When we rise as ego in waking and dream, so many other things seem to exist. When we do not rise as ego, as in sleep, nothing other than ourselves seems to exist. So all other things depend for their semi-existence upon the semi-existence of ourself as ego. So if we look within to see what this ego is, ego will subside, and everything, all other things will drop off, all the dyads and triads will drop off. And then he says, only those who have seen the reality. So what does he mean by only those who have seen? Seen what? The implication is, only those who have seen what remains when all dyads and triads have ceased to exist, along with their root ego, have seen the reality. They will not be confused. That is, they will never again be confused by saying anything else at all, because other things do not actually exist. So when we see things other than ourselves, that is a state of confusion, because we're seeing things that don't actually exist as if they actually existed. So that is the implication of this verse. So I'll go on now to discuss this in more detail. What he refers to here as irritagal, pairs or dyads, are pairs of opposites, such as existence and non-existence, life and death, awareness and non-awareness, knowledge and ignorance, happiness and unhappiness, good and bad, liberation and bondage, and so on. And since these are all prameya, things that are known, they're included among the third of the three factors of that constitute triputi, which are what he refers to here as mupadigal, triads, or the trio of knower, knowing, and known. As I explained above, all means of knowing and everything that is known depends on the knower, because without the knower, there could not either be a means of knowing or anything known. And the knower of all things other than ourself is only ourself as ego. Therefore, in the first sentence of this verse, irritagal, mupadigal, endrum, ondru, patri, irpavam, dyads and triads always exist, holding one thing. What he refers to as ondru, one thing, or the one, is ourself as ego. We seem to be ego only so long as we're attending to anything other than ourselves. So if instead of attending to anything else, we try to attend to ourselves alone, we as ego will subside and dissolve back into the source from which we rose, namely ourself with pure awareness. And since ego is the one thing on which the entire structure of dyads and triads is built, they too will cease to exist along with ego. As Bhagavan implies in the second sentence of this verse, in which he says, Ab ondru edu endru karitinul ul kandal karalum abe. If one sees within the mind what that one thing is, they will slip off. Only when we have thus seen the cessation, or to be more precise, the non-existence of all dyads and triads, have we seen what alone is real, namely ourself as pure awareness. And having thus seen ourselves as we actually are, we will never be confused by seeing anything else at all. As he implies in the final sentence of this verse, kanda vare unme kanda. the final sentences of it, that is 2 sentences. Kalangare Khan. That means only those who have seen the reality. They will not be confused, see. In this context, Kandavare, only those who have seen, can be interpreted in 2 slightly different but complementary ways. Either we can take to mean those who have seen within the mind what that one thing, namely ego, is, in which case Kandavare Unme Kanda, only those who have seen the reality, would imply that those who have seen what ego actually is, have seen what it is, have seen that it is just pure awareness, which alone is what is real. Or we can take it to mean only those who have seen what remains when dyads and triads have slipped off, in which case the sentence would imply that only those who have seen what remains when they have slipped off have seen that it is just pure awareness, which alone is what is real. Whereas knowledge of anything other than ourself entails this triad of knower, means of knowing, and whatever is known, knowledge of ourself entails no such triad, but only one thing, namely ourself. Because in self-knowledge, we alone are not only what knows and what is known, but also the means of knowing, since what we actually are is just pure awareness. And pure awareness knows itself just by being itself. Since we are always ourself and never anything other than ourself, we always know ourself and are never ignorant of ourself. So, what we do not need, yes. This is something Bhagavan often used to say. Bhagavan often used to say, we do not need to realize what is real, but only to unrealize what is unreal, meaning that we do not need to gain any new knowledge, but only need to relinquish all wrong knowledge. So that is what I'll explain now. Why then is it said that as ego we are ignorant of ourselves and therefore need to achieve knowledge of ourselves, Atmajnana or Atmavidya? What is called self-ignorance, Ajnana or Avidya, is not actually an absence of or lack of self-knowledge, but only a distortion of self-knowledge. Because though we always know ourselves, we now know ourselves as if we were something other than what we actually are. Because we know ourselves as a body consisting of 5 sheaths, which is not what we actually are. And all these 5 sheaths are jada, non-aware. That is why Bhagavan taught us that Ajnana or Avidya, in the sense of self-ignorance, is nothing other than ego, the false awareness that is always aware of itself as I am this body. True self-knowledge, Atmajnana or Atmavidya, is just our fundamental awareness of our own existence, I am. So since self-ignorance is just the false awareness, I am this body, even when we are self-ignorant, we do not cease to know ourselves. Therefore, in order to know ourselves as we actually are, we do not need to acquire any knowledge that we do not already possess, but just need to get rid of the wrong knowledge or false awareness, I am this body, which we as ego have now superimposed upon our ever-shining correct knowledge or real awareness, I am. As Bhagavan sometimes used to say humorously when pointing out that the popular English term self-realization is actually a misnomer, what he used to say is, we ourselves are always real, so there's no need for us to realize ourselves. The problem is that we've now realized what is unreal, namely the body and world. So all that is required is for us to realize all that is required is for us to unrealize the unreal, and then what is real alone will remain existing and shiny as it always is. So how can we unrealize the unreal? the unreal seems to be real only because we give it a semblance of reality by attending to it. So to unrealize it, all we need to do is to attend only to what is actually real, namely ourself as the pure awareness I am. In other words, the unreal seems to be clinging. The unreal seems to be clinging to us only because we are clinging to it. So if we cling only to ourselves and thereby cease clinging to anything else, everything else will drop off and we alone will remain shining as I am, as we always actually are. That is not, we all feel that we are in bondage, but nothing is actually binding us. Nothing is holding on to us. But the reason we seem to be in bondage is that we are holding on to all these other things. We are holding on to this body as if it were I. And through the sense of this body, we're constantly holding other things. So all we need to do is give up holding all these things and they'll drop off. But in order to give up holding them, because the very nature of ourself as ego is to always hold things other than ourselves, as Bhagavan says in verse 25 of Ulunaptu, Urupatri undam, grasping form it comes into existence. Urupatri nikam, grasping form it stands or endures. Urupatri undu mika ongum, grasping and feeding on forms, it flourishes abundantly. Uruvitu urupatram, leaving form, it grasps form. So the very nature of ego is to be constantly grasping form. Therefore, if instead of grasping other things, if we try to grasp ourselves, if we try to grasp our own being, we as ego will subside because we're not holding on to anything other than ourselves. And when we subside, everything else will subside along with us. That is why he says the dyads and triads will slip off. This is what he implies in the second sentence of the above verse, verse 9 of Ulunaptu. Av ondru edu endru karitinol kandal karulum abe. If one sees within the mind what that one thing, namely ego, is, they, namely the dyads and triads, will slip off. Attending to anything other than ourself is what is called thinking or mental activity, chittabritti. So what is called thought is just attention to and consequent awareness of anything other than ourselves. So long as we allow our attention to move away from ourselves towards anything else, that outward going movement, pravritti, of our attention is what gives rise to the appearance or seeming existence of all other things. So as long as we continue indulging ourselves in attending to anything other than ourselves, we are perpetuating the seeming existence and reality of such things. Therefore, if we attend only to ourselves and thereby put an end to all thinking, the appearance and seeming reality of all other things will be dissolved along with all the thoughts that it consists of, as Bhagavan implied in the first two sentences of the first verse of Anmavidya. What he said in those two sentences is, May I nirantaram tan ayadu irandidum poyam udumbu ulahum mayai muletu erum. That means, though oneself incessantly and indubitably exists as real, the body and world, which are unreal, arise sprouting as real. And then he goes on to say, Hoi meya nedevu anovum viadu odingidove meya idea belly beyon swayam anma vilangume. That means when thought, which is composed of unreal darkness, is dissolved in such a manner that it does not revive even an iota, in the heart space, which is real, oneself, the sun, will shine by oneself. Therefore, we can unrealize the unreal only by attending to what alone is actually real, namely our own existence, I am. the bright sun of pure awareness, which is the infinite space called the heart. Does anyone have any questions on anything I've said so far?
Sir, I have a doubt. I have a question that
Yes.
how can we keep ourselves to the self? From morning to evening, we are doing things and work. We are watching things. So means the things are not the outward things which are not real are we are getting entangled with that now means too much.
Yes.
So means
Yes.
how can we remain with this self? Yeah.
Okay, how do we get entangled with these things? We get entangled with them because we have so much interest in these things.
So
We've
why
got so,
this is there is the interest? Why?
yeah, well, this is the nature, because now we take ourselves to be this body, and as this body, we depend on so many other things. We need food, we need clothing, we need air to breathe, we need water to drink. So we seem, by identifying ourselves as a body, we seem to be dependent on things other than ourselves. So it seems to us that if we get more of the other things, then we'll be happier. If I have more money, I'll be happy. If I have more this, I'll be happy. If I'm more learned, I'll be happy. Or if I have more, whatever interests us. If I watch more cricket, I'll be happier, or whatever it is. We think we are dependent on other things because we have identified ourselves with this body. This body is certainly dependent. Without air, it will die in a few minutes. Without water, it will die in a few days. Without food, it'll die in a few more days. So we are dependent on so many things as this body. But are we this body? So it is the nature of ego to take interest in things other than itself, because ego seems to depend on things. In fact, it is true, without grasping things other than ourselves, we cannot stand for a moment as ego. Because we now seem to be ego, we therefore have a very strong inclination to grasp other things. The inclinations to grasp other things are what are called Vishaya vasanas. So the obstacles are not the external world. The obstacles are our own Vishaya vasanas, which make us inclined to attend to the world. Coming back to your question, whatever you may be doing, whatever you may be experiencing, what is your one fundamental experience? Your one fundamental experience is I am. Without knowing I am, you couldn't know any other thing. So the one thing we know always, throughout the waking state, we know I am. Throughout dream state, we know I am. Throughout sleep, we know I am. So the one real knowledge, the one real awareness is this fundamental awareness I am. That fundamental awareness I am in its pure condition is Brahman. But now it seems to be mixed and conflated with adjuncts. Instead of being aware of ourselves as just I am, we're aware of ourselves as I am this body. And so we have imposed all these limitations on ourselves. And because of these limitations, it seems to us to be necessary to depend on other things. But in sleep, we are perfectly happy without any of these things. Whatever may interest us in the waking state, we forget all these things when we fall asleep, and we are perfectly happy. The billionaire has to leave his billions when he goes to sleep. The powerful politician has to leave all his power when he goes to sleep. The person who's very interested in philosophy has to leave all his philosophy when he goes to sleep. The scientist has to leave all his science when he goes to sleep. The cricket player has to leave all his cricket when he goes to sleep. We leave everything when we go to sleep, yet we are perfectly happy. So we should understand from this, but though as ego we seem to be dependent on other things, we actually do not depend on anything other than ourselves. Our dependence on other things is an illusion caused by our rising as ego. So if we have some discrimination, this is what is known in Vedanta. The first qualification of for the study and practice of Vedanta is nitya, anitya, vastu viveka. That is, we need to distinguish what is permanent from what is impermanent. Everything we experience is impermanent, but the one thing that is permanent is I am. Our fundamental awareness, our own being, is permanent. Even ego, the knower of all other things, is impermanent, because ego appears in waking and dream, it disappears in sleep. So what we actually are is what is permanent, because even though ego is absent in sleep, we exist there. So we need to apply some discrimination. That is, we need to use our viveka to understand, though we seem to be dependent on all these other things, actually we are not truly dependent on these things. We do not need anything other than ourselves. So the practice of Atmavichara is a practice of weaning our mind off its attachment to things other than ourselves. So we need to hold on to self-attentive. What is real is only ourselves. So being self-attentive is holding what is real. But to the extent to which we hold what is real, the unreal will drop off. But then the question arises, but I've got a busy life. I've got wife or husband and children. I've got elderly parents. I've got so much responsibility. I've got a high pressure job that makes so many demands on me, and I need to do this in order to pay all the bills. So how can I spend my time tending to myself when I've got all these responsibilities? If we are realistic with ourselves, if we consider things carefully, if we consider what we think about during the day, we think so many thoughts about so many things, but most of the thoughts we think are not thoughts that are immediately necessary. We're not always thinking about if we're at work, we're not only thinking about the work we're doing, we'll also be in the back of our mind, we'll be thinking about how we're going to pay the bills, what shopping we need to do on the way home in the evening, what problems there are at home. We'll be thinking so many things. In the background, those thoughts are going on, whatever the work we're doing. So if we consider the matter carefully, it is clear to us that the majority of thoughts we think are not actually necessary. That is, whatever we may think about the problems we face in life, we can't solve those problems. At office, we have to do our office work. So thinking about all the other problems in life isn't going to solve those problems, because we're now supposed to be attending to our office work. But if instead of thinking all the unnecessary thoughts, if we were to replace all unnecessary thoughts with attention to ourselves, most of our attention would be on ourselves, because actually the work we do requires very little attention. Take, for example, nowadays many people drive cars. If you're a car driver, once you get used to driving, particularly, for example, if you drive to work every day, it's the same route you drive on, the same place where a traffic lights, you have to stop and you have to proceed, and there are different road hazards on the way, different vehicles coming from all directions. We navigate through all these things with a minimal amount of attention. If you were to attend to everything, you wouldn't be a very good driver. Because if you were attending to everything, your attention would be too scattered. So actually, we do many tasks more efficiently with minimum attention. If we gave too much attention to what we're doing, we would be making mistakes. So, in fact, most of the tasks we do in the daytime, during our life, are tasks which are better done with minimum attention than with a lot of attention. Because things, if you're driving a car, for example, or riding a bicycle or anything, before you knew how to drive a car or ride a bicycle, it seemed difficult. But once you've learned it, it becomes second nature to you. So these things you do automatically without thinking about it. If you get on a bicycle and think about how you're going to balance on the bicycle, you're not going to be able to balance. But because you've ridden a bicycle so many times, without even thinking about it, you're able to balance easily. But supposing while you're riding your cycle, you'll suddenly begin to think, how am I balancing? Am I really able to balance? When you start to think about it, you'll topple off. So like there's so many things in life, we actually do better with minimum attention. So since most tasks we do don't require a lot of attention, if we really are interested to know who am I, we could be attending to ourselves. An analogy I often give to illustrate this is, supposing a very dear friend of yours was critically ill in hospital, in ICU. They may have caught COVID or something, or they may have had an accident or something. But anyway, whatever the cause, for some reason, they're critically ill in hospital. And the doctors are not able, the doctors and nurses are doing all they can to take care of your friend. But the doctors have told you or told your friend's relatives, it's touch and go. We will do our best, but it's in God's hands. We can't say whether he or she is going to recover or not. If it's in such a situation, will you not be often thinking about your friend? Even when you're at work, the thought of your friend will keep on coming to your mind. Even when you're driving your car, the thought of your friend will be coming to your mind. Even when you're at home cooking or washing the pots and pans or whatever you may be doing, that thought of your friend will be constantly in the background of your mind because of your love and concern for them. If you had an equal amount of love and concern to know who am I, whatever pressing responsibilities you may have, you would find time to attend to yourself. So it's not a matter of, it's not external activities that are getting in the way. The problem is our own Vishaya Vasanas, our own liking to attend to things other than ourselves, our own liking to take interest in other things. That is the problem. To overcome that problem, the only way is patient and persistent practice. That is by attending to ourselves, by trying to attend to ourselves more and more, we are gradually strengthening the Satvasana, the love to hold on to our own being and thereby just subside and be as we actually are. And we are correspondingly weakening the Vishaya Vasanas. So the only way to cultivate the Satvasana and to weaken the Vishaya Vasanas is to persevere in this practice of self-attentiveness as much as we can. Why I say as much as we can? Because we will not do more than we have love for. If we have no love for attending to ourselves and so much interest in other things, so much interested in the stock market or the latest scientific papers on global warming or whatever may interest us, if we have more interest in those things than in knowing ourselves, the attention naturally goes to where our interests lie. So our attention will go within only when we are passionately interested in knowing who am I. Most of us don't yet have sufficiently strong interest, sufficiently strong love to know what we actually are and to be what we actually are. But we can gain that by patient and persistent practice. So if we consider Bhagavan's teachings and understood Bhagavan's teachings, at least to a certain extent, that should be enough to get us started. And the more we persevere in this, the more important this will become to us. The more we will feel we will feel something is lacking when we're not attending to ourselves. So we'll be trying to attend to ourselves more and more and more. So as Bhagavan said, nobody has succeeded. Nobody ever could succeed in this path without patient perseverance. We have to continue, however difficult it may seem to be, we have to continue trying. The theme of this song we're discussing, Anna Vidde, the theme of this song, the Pallavi, is Aye Ati Sulapum. Anna Vidde, Aye Ati Sulapum. That is extremely easy. This Atma Vidya is extremely easy. But to us, it seems to be difficult. Why does it seem to be difficult? Because we are more interested in other things than we are interested in knowing ourselves. So that it is not actually difficult, it just seems to be difficult. But we can overcome this seeming difficulty by patient and persistent practice. There is no other way. What about grace? Will not grace help us? Yes, grace is helping us here and now. It is grace that is giving us the liking to turn within. Ultimately, it's all the work of grace. Whatever effort we make is the work of grace. So grace is playing its part. We need to play our part by yielding ourselves to grace. Since grace is the force that is pulling our attention inwards, we can yield ourselves to grace only by trying our best to turn within. And we shouldn't think that a change of lifestyle is going to make any difference. We may think, oh, now I've got so many cares and responsibilities and everything, so I'm not able to practice. If I go and renounce everything and go and become a sannyasi and sit in a cave in the Himalayas, then I'll have plenty of time for attending to myself. If you're not able to attend to yourself here and now, you will not be able to attend to yourself however remote the cave in the Himalayas may be. But even there, you'll have some worries. How am I going to tackle the cold? How am I going to get enough food to eat? There'll be so many worries you have there. So long as the mind likes to go out, it will always find something to latch on to, something to think about. But if we have love to turn within, nothing external can obstruct us. As Bhagavan often used to say, prarabdha affects only the outward term mind, but it can never prevent us turning our mind within. So it's according to prarabdha, but we have so much work, so many responsibilities, and so on and so forth. But the same prarabdha that has given us these responsibilities will also, that is in accordance with that prarabdha, God who has given us that prarabdha will make our mind, speech, and body do whatever is necessary for that prarabdha to unfold. As Bhagavan says in the first sentence of the note he wrote for his mother, Avarava prarabdha prakaram adakanavan angang girindu artavipan. That means in accordance with the prarabdha of each one, he who is for that, meaning God or Guru, the one who is allotted the prarabdha, Angang Girindu, being there, means being in each and every place. In other words, being in the heart of each one of us, Artavipan, he will make us act. So whatever actions you need to do in order for your prarabdha to unfold, you will be made to do that. So if it is your destiny to be a family person, to have 10 children, to have a very responsible job and everything, that will all happen, and you will do whatever is necessary to make that happen. But if you are wise, you will not attach importance to these things. You'll attach importance only to turning within. And your turning within will not prevent the prarabdha. The prarabdha will go on as it's meant to go on. But by turning within, we are separating ourselves from the experience of the prarabdha. So whatever bad prarabdha may come, let it come. If we hold on to ourselves, even if our next prarabdha is to be put in hell, fine, no problem. So long as we're holding on to ourselves, not even hell can touch us. So it's all, that's why Bhagavan said, Bhakti is the mother of jnana. It's all a matter of love. And we can cultivate that love only by patient and persistent practice. How does patient and persistent practice cultivate the love? Because we will do the practice only to the extent we have love. And the more we do the practice, the more that love will grow. So by attending to other things, we are feeding and nourishing the sattvasanas, the inclinations to attend to them. By attending to ourselves, we are feeding and nourishing the sattvasana and starving all the other vasanas. So patient and persistent practice is the only way. So if we're serious about this, we will try our best. We may not always succeed. Many times we'll fail. Many times our attention will go outwards and get caught up in all the worldly concerns and so on. Doesn't matter. However many times the attention goes away, we need to bring it back and try to hold on to self-attentiveness. Does that adequately answer your question?
Yes, sir. Sir, I have another question.
Yes.
That if I close my eyes and I want to see that who am I, and I am questioning myself. So
Yes.
if I see, then there is nothing. Matlab, there is just silence. If I inquire more, there is only silence. But and this silence is always there. Matlab, if I am asking you the question, this silence is going on behind. I don't know what is this. Matlab, I don't know what is this. Matlab, what?
That is, firstly, to inquire who am I, we don't need to close our eyes. Because whether our eyes are open or closed, we're aware I am. When we turn our attention inwards, if it seems to us that we are seeing a blank, we are looking at something other than ourselves. So who is aware of that blank? I am. There's actually no such thing as a void or a blank, because whatever void or blank may appear, we are present there to be aware of it.
No,
so
silence,
it is not
I am
emptiness.
saying. Not emptiness, silence.
Silence, fine.
Yeah,
whatever
yes,
we call it, silence is our own real nature. But silence, when Bhagavan talks about silence, he's not talking about physical silence. He's not talking about mental silence. He's talking about the silence of pure being. As you say, that silence is ever present there. However much noise there is, that is, however much the mind is agitated, however much noise there may be outside, in our heart, the silence of pure being is always shining. So if we hold on to that and recognize that that alone is real, that's all that we need to do. Just hold on to it more and more and more. But if you take that silence to be something other than yourself, if that silence is something that appears and disappears, then it is not what you actually are. But if you can recognize that that silence is what is ever present, even in the midst of any amount of mental activity, any amount of activity in the surroundings, if you recognize that the underlying all that is this silence that is ever shining in our heart as our own being, I am. If that is the silence you're talking about, that is what you need to hold on to, because that alone is real. But if the silence you're talking about is something that appears and disappears, that is not the real silence, because the real silence is eternal. It is ever present, ever shining. It is what we all experience as I am. And that silence is Bhagavan. That silence is God. That silence is Guru, whatever you want to call it. That alone is what is real. That is Brahman.
Thank you. Thank
Okay.
you.
Are there any other questions? Okay, so shall I continue a bit more to discuss this this verse? So I've talked about verse 9 of Uludunapadu. Verse 9 is the first of a series of verses. That is, in verse 9, Bhagavan talks about dyads in general. For dyads, he's talking about your pairs of opposites. Then in verses 10, 11, 12, and 13, he talks about one of the very fundamental dyads, the dyad of knowledge and ignorance. So that is what that's what he talks about in these verses. And these verses are directly relevant to what he's saying, what we're talking about in what he's talking about in this third verse. He says, without knowing oneself, if one knows whatever else, so what? If one has known oneself, then what exists to know? So these verses of Ulujun Abdu, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, are extremely relevant to what he's saying here. So I will begin to discuss these now. That is, in the implication of verse 10 is that real awareness is only awareness that is aware of oneself, or awareness that is aware of ourselves as we actually are, which is the reality of ego. That is, what we actually are is the reality of ego. And ego is the one to whom all knowledge and ignorance about other things appear. Since self-ignorance, avidya, is not an absence of the one real knowledge I am, but just a seeming distortion of it, it is not actually ignorance, but just an erroneous knowledge or false awareness. Self-knowledge and self-ignorance are therefore not a dyad or pair of opposites, because even in the midst of self-ignorance, self-knowledge continues to shine as I am, albeit seemingly, in the view of ourself as ego, mixed and conflated with adjuncts as I am this body. So self-knowledge exists and shines eternally, independent of and untouched by the appearance or disappearance of self-ignorance. Hence, when Bhagavan talks about the dyad of knowledge and ignorance in verse 10 of Ulujun Abdu, the knowledge and ignorance he is referring to is not knowledge and ignorance of ourselves, but only knowledge and ignorance of other things. What he says in verse 10 is, without ignorance, knowledge does not exist. Without knowledge, that ignorance does not exist. Only the knowledge or awareness that knows oneself, who is the first, as to whom are that knowledge and ignorance, is real knowledge. This, again, it's Bhagavan says a lot here, but it's in a very compact way. So we need to unpack it to understand what he's saying. Any state in which we're aware of phenomena, anything other than ourselves, is just a dream. And whatever phenomena we're aware of in a dream do not exist independent of our awareness of them. Since they appear and disappear in our awareness, phenomena are just a temporary appearance. So our knowledge of awareness of them is always preceded by and followed by ignorance or non-awareness of them. Therefore, knowledge of anything other than ourselves cannot exist without prior and subsequent ignorance of it, as Bhagavan implies in the first sentence of this verse. Ariyame vittu, arivu indruam. That literally means leaving ignorance, but leaving ignorance here implies without ignorance, knowledge does not exist. That is, all our knowledge of other things is against the background of prior and subsequent ignorance of it. And whatever we may know in the waking state, we cease to know any of it in sleep. So the knowledge and ignorance always go hand in hand. And then the next point he says in the next sentence is a still more subtle point. Since nothing exists except in our awareness, any particular thing exists, or to be more precise, seems to exist, only so long as we're aware of it in some way or other, whether directly by perceiving it or indirectly by remembering it, inferring it, supposing it, imagining it, or knowing about it in any other way, such as by belief or hearsay. And hence it does not exist at all when we become, and hence it does not exist at all before we become aware of it or after we cease to be aware of it. Therefore, since we cannot be said to be ignorant of something that does not exist, our prior and subsequent ignorance of something exists only so long as we know or are aware of that thing. As Bhagavan implies, in the second sentence of this verse. Arivu vitu avariyame indrahum. That means leaving or without knowledge, that ignorance does not exist. So there's no knowledge without ignorance and no ignorance without knowledge. Is what Bhagavan is saying here. That, in other words, knowledge and ignorance are dire, they're a pair of opposites. Pairs of opposites always depend each member of a pair of opposites depends upon the other one.
Namo Ramana sir,
Yes.
sorry to interrupt you, but we've got two questions on YouTube. One
Yes.
is a fairly long question.
Right.
Would you want me to record these? Sorry, not record. Note these two questions and send you on email, because we've got less than 5 minutes left now.
Okay.
Or would you want to take up the one of this question, which might be a smaller one?
Okay, let me just finish what I'm explaining now, and then I'll take up and we'll attend to however many questions we can attend to.
Sure, sir.
And other ones we can keep for the next meeting. If you, as you say, if you can email them to me, during next month I can answer them. So I'll just finish the point I'm just explaining now. So as Bhagavan explains here, knowledge and ignorance, each are dependent on the other. They're a pair of opposites. So to whom do all such knowledge and ignorance appear? In other words, in whose views do they seem to exist? Only in the view of ourself as ego, because it is only when we rise and stand as ego, namely in waking or dream, that knowledge and ignorance of anything other than ourselves seem to exist. When we do not rise or stand as ego, such as in sleep, neither knowledge nor ignorance of anything else seems to exist at all. Our supposed ignorance or non-awareness of other things in sleep seems to exist only from a perspective of ourself as ego in waking and dream. Because while we are actually asleep or in any other state of manolaya, nothing else seems to exist, either for us to know or to be ignorant of. So it is often said sleep is a state of ignorance, but Bhagavan clarified sleep is a state of ignorance only from the perspective of the mind in waking and dream. In sleep, we are beyond both knowledge and ignorance. We remain just as pure awareness, which is untouched by knowledge or ignorance of anything else. We seem to be ego only so long as we're aware of anything other than ourselves. So if instead of attending to anything else, we attend only to ourselves, who now seems to be ego, we will thereby subside and dissolve back into the source from which we arose, namely ourself as pure awareness. And what will then remain shining all alone is only ourself as pure awareness, namely the adjunct-free awareness I am, which is what we always actually are. Being aware of ourselves thus is just, being aware of ourselves thus as just pure awareness alone is real awareness or true knowledge. As Bhagavan points out in the final sentence of this verse, Anda arivum ariyamayum aku endru amudalam tanne ariyum arive arivu. That means only the knowledge or awareness but knows the reality of oneself, in other words, the reality of ego, who is the first? That is, ego is the first to rise. As by investigating to whom are that knowledge and ignorance is real knowledge or real awareness. What he implies by saying this is that real awareness is only awareness that is aware of ourself as we actually are, namely as pure awareness, which is the reality of ego, who is the first thing to rise, and that we can be aware of ourselves thus only by investigating ego, who is the one to whom all knowledge and ignorance about other things appears. So do we have time for me to answer one or two questions, or should we keep them for next time?
We have reached our time limit.
Okay.
I have already emailed the two questions to you, one from Rajat Ji, the other is from an ID, Soul Musica. So maybe next time when you commence, you could start the session by addressing these two questions.
Okay, that's a good idea. So I'll finish. Om Namo Bhagavate Sri Arunachala Ramanaya.
Once again, Mr. James, thank you for enlightening all the Ramana Kendra Delhi devotees.
Yes.
And another request to devotees on YouTube or Zoom, for any questions for Mr. James, please feel free to WhatsApp me or email in advance. So those can be sent over to him much in advance. Thank you, sir. And we shall meet you again next month on the second Sunday. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And I'm sorry, I have another meeting now, so I have to leave a little early.
Sure,
so if you'll forgive me for
perfectly
leaving
okay,
now.
sir. Perfectly.
Okay.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. No more.
I shall now request Narayananji at the Kendra to conclude with Aarti and Akshamana. Sir.
கருணாகர கணபதியே அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சலம் என அகமே நினைப்பவர் அகந்தை வேறருவ அருணாச்சலா அழகு சுந்தரமோ அகமும் நீமுற்று அபிநமாயிருப்போம் அருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா அகமுகுந்தீர்க்கும் அககுகை சிறையாய் அமர்வித்ததென்கொல் அருணாச்சலா ஆறு காயனை ஆண்டனை அகற்றி இளம் பழித்திடும் அருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா இப்பழித்தம் உனை நினைத்தாய் இனியார் விடுவார் அருணாச்சலா ஈன்றிடும் மன்னை பெரிதருள் புரிவோய் இது உனதருள் அருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சல 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 அருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சல 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 அருணாச்சலா உனையே மாற்றி ஓடாதுள்ளத்தின் உறுதியாயிருப்பார் அருணாச்சலா ஊற்றுற்று உழம்பிடை கட்டு அடக்கி அழகை காட்டருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சல 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 அருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சல அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா என்னை அழிப்போ என்னை கலவாவினில் இதுவோ ஆண்மை அருணாச்சலா ஏன் இந்த உறக்கம் என்னை பிறர் இழுக்க இது உனக்கழகோ அருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சல சிவ அகத்திலேயோ அருணாச்சலா ஒருவனா உன்னை ஒளித்தேவன் வருவார் சூதே இது அருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ நாச்சலா அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா ஓகார ஒரு உயர் உன்னையார் அறிவார் அருணாச்சலா அவ்வை போல எனக்குள் அருளை தந்து என ஆழ்வது உன் கடன் அருணாச்சலம் அருணாச்சல 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 சிவ அருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சல 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 அருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சலம் வாழி நண்பர்களும் வாழி அக்ஷரமணமானே வாழி भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो यो न प्रचोदयात् मृदत्वं स्वाहा प्राणाय स्वाहा माने स्वाहा ज्ञानाय स्वाहा उदाने स्वाहा समाने स्वाहा ब्रह्मणे स्वाहा नमो भगवते किरणाचुकिरणाय नमो भगवते किरणाचुकिरणाय नमो भगवते किरणाचुकिरणाय नमः दक्षिणामूर्ति राजा भैरवानंद भैरवाय पार्वती नमः शिवाय नमः शिवाय नमः शिवाय नमः शिवाय शिवाय नमः अन्नदानं गोसीरं नैवेद्यं समर्पयामि मध्ये मध्ये पानीयं समर्पयामि अमृतपुत्रवसं समर्पयामि नीराजनं समर्पयामि नीराजनानन्तरम् आसमनीयं समर्पयामि कर्पूर नीराजनं श्री रमणमालिके समर्पयामि ओम नमो भगवते श्री अरुणाचल श्री रमणाय नमः नमो भगवते श्री अरुणाचल श्री रमणाय नमः नमो भगवते श्री अरुणाचल श्री रमणाय नमः ओमो वायज्ञ राजमागते तो राजासन राजो वासो मेरे देव स्वामेदानी अमुखी भवन्ति एदावन्तो वै देवानां स्वाहा तये वास्मै स्वान् प्रयच्छन्ति तये नमः सवन्दे राजाय देवसुरागा भवति नतत्र सूर्योपादनचन्द्रकारणं हरि ओम हरि ओम हरि ओम
Namo Ramana. This brings us to the closure of today's Sunday Satsang with Mr. Michael James at Ramana Kendra Delhi. We shall reconvene in 2 weeks from now for another Satsang with Raghavji. Namo Ramana.